The real value of GDP is the total value of goods and services that is rendered within a country. The amount of money that is collected in the form of tax is a direct revenue to the government. Market price is going to be the actual transacted price, including indirect taxes. Good morning and welcome to the second session in Unit 2, where we are going to speak about the concepts of national income. And this is going to be a very interesting topic. Why? Because we need to now understand how we are going to calculate the national income. We have spoken about a lot of words like GDP, GNP, GNI, so many factors that we have been speaking about. But then what is really interesting, what is really needed for the hour is about the GDP and the GNP factors altogether. So we have to understand what is GDP, what is GNP, and then we need to proceed further. So what we are going to do here is that let us first try to understand what exactly gross domestic product means to us. So let's look here. The total value of goods produced and services rendered within a country during its gross domestic product, during its year, is called as the GDP altogether. So the total value of goods produced, that's the first keyword that you have to remember. Total value of goods produced and services rendered within the country. So whatever that happens within the country, that's where GDP is going to come into picture. So that these are the most important factors that you need to understand. The value of goods that is produced within the country, both goods and services that are done within the country, is what is going to constitute your GDP. Now, if you look into this GDP terminology, people always get confused saying that GDP is actually what we mean by saying that the growth, the income that has come, all these factors. GDP is only a progressive factor. It is an indicator. GDP is not the actual income. Please try to understand that. Why? Because whenever a forecast is being given on GDP, if somebody comes and says that India's GDP will grow by 11%, by 12%, by 13%, whatever numbers that we are talking about, this is only a forecast that we are giving. This is not an actual income. We are only trying to track the growth from one end to the other end. So that is why GDP is actually trying to understand the real value of GDP is the total value of goods and services that is rendered within a country. Now, moving further, the GDP is calculated at market price and defined at GDP at market price. Different constituents are there for a GDP to understand. Now, the concept of GDP is broken down under so many factors. So let's start with wages and salaries, followed by rent, interest, undistributed profits, mixed income, direct taxes, dividend, and depreciation. So what are the constituents of GDP? These are all the factors that will constitute a GDP altogether. So GDP is not going to be a simple process. GDP is complicated by nature. Why? Because the calculation that is involved itself are of different factors. So you have to think, you have to include a lot of factors here in terms of making it possible. Now, what happens here is that when we talk about wages and salaries, now wages and salaries are very, very important. Why? Because when we talk about wages, wages means to us that these are all the factors which is going to come into picture in terms of your growth factors. Why? Because you are paying wages and salaries on a regular basis. So there are n number of workers who are working in different factors, in different forms, in different organizations altogether. So they are being paid their wages and salaries. So definitely one of the most important constituent of a GDP is the wage and the salary part. You cannot avoid the wage and salary, because without that you will not be able to constitute an entire factor here. So this is very, very important for us. Followed by the rent process. Rent, is it an income? Now many of them have this question, have this doubt in the mind. Now, for example, you are getting 50,000 rupees in the form of rent, 20,000 rupees in the form of rent. Is it an income? The answer is absolutely yes. Though you might call it as a shadow employment, or you might call it as a disguised, the unemployment factor, you might call it as, you're not an active member in terms of earning the money factor, but yes, it is counted as an income. You are receiving it to your pocket in some format in the form of a rent. So rent is always counted as one of the important constituents of GDP, followed by the interest factor. How much are you earning in interest? Now, the rent and interest are two important things in India. Why? Because these are something which is a inactive form of income. Accordingly, I would say that it's a passive form of income altogether. But yes, that passive form of income needs to be added to constituent the GDP. It is a very, very important factor. So that's why I would say that rent and interest are mandatory in terms of counting. You need to understand how rent and interest comes into picture, followed by the undistributed profits. Now, before I go there, I will also tell you what interest is. There is a lot of money that gets accrued by depositing that money in the bank. So the net interest that you derive from these deposits, that is also a form of income. Now, there are many people in India who deposit their money in the banks and they take back the interest. So similarly, for a country, the country India would have also deposited money through its exchange, through its trade and business, and the country will enjoy the interest part of it. So similarly, interest becomes a very, very important constituent. Undistributed profits, which means to say that which is not yet given back to the public, it is retained, it is yet to be distributed. So that is also a part of the GDP cycle, followed by the mixed income. Mixed income is a constant, it's a mixture, which means to say both public, private put together. We are bringing in the mixed income factor. It is a composite factor altogether. So I would always say that mixed income is very, very important, followed by the word called as direct taxes. Now, direct taxes are very, very valuable for us to understand. Why? A country runs because of the taxation. The amount of money that is collected in the form of tax is a direct revenue to the government. So what does the government do? How does it work? Because of the taxation factor. Though we complain that, for everything there is a GST added, for everything there is a tax in India, but that is the direct source of income to the government. So one has to understand that if the economy has to run, if the economy has to function smoothly, then we need to give importance to direct taxes. The taxation is a direct source of income for the government, followed by the dividends that we are earning in form of shares, in form of the other revenue sources, and the depreciation factor. Now, depreciation is definitely going to be a negative factor where we are going to subtract it because of the usage value, what I call depreciation as the wear and tear value of an asset. That is where depreciation comes into picture. So definitely for every building, machinery, plant, all these factors, form of assets will have a wear and tear value. So depreciation is definitely going to be a very, very important concept that we are going to subtract from the main factor altogether, followed by the gross national product. Now let's come to the GNP. Till now, we were talking about the GDP. Now we are going to talk about the word called as GNP. Now this is a very, very important factor. For the calculation of the gross national product, we need to collect and assess the data from all the productive activities like agriculture, wood, minerals, commodities, distributions to the production by transport, communications, insurance companies, and services rendered by lawyers, doctors, teachers at the market price. Now this is the gross national product. This is quite an exclusive and an exhaustive product in terms of calculation. Why? Because this will include all the productive activities that are happening in a country. Now let us go back to a scenario while for a moment, like a country like India. where you see hundreds and thousands of people engrossed in their own profession who try to come up with some productive output for the country. Now, you might be a consultant, somebody else might be working as a lawyer, a doctor, an architect, an engineer, a teacher. There are n number of professions which we are talking about, but all these people produce some quantifiable output in this country. That quantifiable output needs to be measured, analyzed, and it has to be put across in form of a factor that can be recognized. So that is where this GNP comes into picture. Many a times what happens is that certain sectors in India, especially if I look into agriculture, many a times we don't actually include the efforts of labor that is being put by the farmer. We only calculate the output of agriculture in the form of produce. That's it. So we are not going to calculate the actual values. We are not going to calculate the actual efforts that have gone in. We are only worried about the output factor. But when we are going into this gross national product, there are several factors like this. For example, when we talk about the concept of log, the wood cutting business, even that is going to be an GNP. The forest produce is also a part of the GNP. Mining and metallurgy, that is also a part of the GNP. So we have so many factors. The metal commodities, even they are a part of GNP. A scrap metal business, even from there is some income that is being generated. That's also a part of the GNP. But what happens here is that most of the time we don't pay attention to those micro details. We only pay attention to the large and the prevailing sector, and we try to calculate some figure and say that India stands here. But if you actually calculate each and every productive activity that is involved in our country, you will be definitely able to appreciate the factor that yes, there is a whole lot of exercise that goes in terms of this entire gross national product. So definitely you need to understand that this is a very big concept in terms of analyzing and understanding. Followed by, it also includes net income arising in the country from abroad. Now, this is very, very important because four main constituents that we are going to talk about later. But this factor, net income arising in a country from abroad. India is such a great country that apart from the large population that we have, the 135 crore population that we are going to talk about, more than 70% of America's population is again Indians. So that means we have not still added up that value. You go to any of the European countries in the world, there would definitely be an Indian there. You go to any of the Asian countries, again there is an Indian there. You go to any of the Western American countries, yes, there is an Indian working there, which means we are widely spread. We are not a citizen who just belongs to one country, but we belong to the globe. Which means we work from different countries and different kinds of income come back to our motherland. So we also need to understand it includes the net income arising in a country from abroad. That's a very, very important factor that one has to understand. So when I say from abroad, when I use that word very clearly, it means to say that consumer goods and services which are being done, that's very, very important here. The gross private domestic income, we are going to see the four association factors. So one is the consumer goods and services, which we are talking in GNP, the gross private domestic income, goods and services rendered that we have done, income arising from abroad. So look at the four major constituents. One side, the consumer goods and services, typical FMCG, when we are talking about all the products that are being used, that are being manufactured in our country, yes, they are definitely a part of our system. They are definitely a part of this main constituent altogether, followed by the gross private domestic income. Now, what is the gross private domestic income? I use this word domestic. Why? Because it is within the country. It is produced very much within the country. The amount of money that is being generated by an average citizen in this country. Now, why this is important for us is because when you look into India, there is a value for labor. So if you go and ask anybody today in the country, how much are you being paid per hour? How much are you being paid per day, per month, per year? There is a value. So for example, let's take the US labor statistics. It says that US citizens are being paid an average of $7.25 per hour. That's the average labor rate. If you look into Iceland, which has got the world's highest in terms of per hour labor rate, they pay about $32. When you look into Denmark, which pays about $22, Finland, Norway, which pays about $27 to $25. These are all countries where you see that the labor wages that is being paid is extremely high. So similarly, India also has got a labor rate altogether. Now, for example, when you look into agriculture, they say that on a day's labor wages would be about 400 to 500 rupees for a person who's working as a day earner, a wage laborer in the agriculture sector. There are certain sectors where an average person is being paid about 800 to 1000 rupees, say in the real estate sector. So different sectors have got a minimum wage labor. So using that private domestic income, why we are so concerned is that what is the earning capacity of every citizen in India who is working under different sectors. So what is his capacity to earn and move further? So how much are we actually earning? Because we don't go as a figurative head saying that this is the actual income. For many sectors, we are not even able to calculate the actual income. We just go by assumptions. But then in order to make the GNP true, we need to include the private domestic income, which is very, very important here. Followed by the goods and services produced, the rendered factor that we are talking about. So we have rendered some goods and services. We have, produced and we have sold it across. We have given some services. It might be consulting, it might be healthcare, it might be teaching, it might be a legal, whatever is the factor. So we have rendered some services. So that is going to be again valued. Now, in the year 1997, I would like to talk about why that year was important for India is that because that was the year when India got into the outsourcing business, the business process outsourcing factor. In BPO, India made a rapid stride. In the last about 20 odd years, if you look about 25 odd years, in fact, to say, India made a rapid stride in terms of IT enabled services. One side we have the IT, the other side we have the ITES, that is the IT enabled services, the outsourcing part. Now there, we rendered a pure service game by just doing customer service or doing KPOs, knowledge process outsourcing, legal process outsourcing, and probably providing all kind of technical support and other things, and we earned a huge amount of money. So those are all the factors that you need to understand in terms of the services rendered. Followed by income arising from abroad. Definitely we make a lot of money because there are people settled in abroad and they do make income and send it back to India. So income arising from abroad is also a very, very important factor that we need to talk about. Followed by market price. This is very, very interesting for all of us to talk. Why? Because market price is going to be the actual transacted price, including indirect taxes such as GST, customs duty, etc. And they tend to raise the prices of goods and services in the economy. Now, what is this market price? What is the normal price, market price? So many different concepts altogether. Now, let's try to understand this very clearly. Why? Because when you go to the market, there is an actual price that is being given to you. So I want to buy this pen, or I want to buy a shirt, I want to buy a trouser, whatever is that, there is an actual price that is. They say that the cost of a pen is 10 rupees. Example. So I'm going to buy a pen, the cost of the pen is 10 rupees. This is the actual transacted price, which includes taxes like the GST and other forms. So this is what I am paying to the customer, and I'm acquiring a pen at 10 rupees. So this is the actual price, what you are exactly paying to get that particular goods or services. Now comes the factor cost. It includes the cost of factors of production, interest on capital, wages to labor, land profit, stakeholder services, all those factors. So what is the cost that is involved in manufacturing that 10 rupees pen? There are different factors altogether. If you start understanding this concept very, very clearly, you will be able to appreciate and understand the segmentation here, clearly stating that there is a cost factor that is involved. There are a lot of cost factors. In fact, you would be able to see that the cost factor starts moving up as you start getting into a different kind of manufacturing. If you are a very customized manufacturer, there's a huge cost appreciation that comes into picture. If you are just going to manufacture at a large scale, en masse, then the price will come down. But then ultimately what we are worried about is that the cost of factors that are involved, including interest on capital, the wages to labor, land, rent, and all those factors that are involved here. So these are all very much involved. Thus the services provided by the service provider to the goods, these are all factors which is equal to the revenue price. So whatever money that is being put inside, that will be equal to the revenue price factor. So that is very, very important here. Why this is important, why this matters a lot, let's try to understand is that because the producer who is going to produce a good, he wants a return, he wants to collect back his revenue. So what he will try to do is that he will calculate all the factor cost that is involved in the manufacturing and then put a price, a cost marked up price in order to earn a profit. So that's why factor cost is very, very important for all of us to understand, because it tells us exactly how much is the cost that is involved in terms of manufacturing it. Followed by alternatively, I'm just using another factor, market price net of minus the indirect taxes. So the net of the indirect taxes, you will be able to get the revenue price or the factor cost. So how is the revenue price? Which is equal to market price net of the indirect taxes. Now what is net indirect taxes? It is equal to indirect taxes net of subsidies. What are all the subsidies that you have received? Subsidies are nothing but small discounts that are given by the government based on certain specific sector. So the government gives some allowances. It helps you to promote those kind of sectors. It helps you to bring in more production because government is trying to promote that particular sector. So what should be the factor cost? Market price less indirect taxes and add the subsidies, because that's how you will be able to get to the market price is 10 rupees less the indirect tax. So let's say the indirect tax is 2 rupees plus the subsidy is 3 rupees. So now you see 10 plus 3, that is about 13 rupees. 13 minus 2. How much is it? 11 rupees is your answer. So the answer should be 11 rupees. That is the actual value which we are going to calculate as the market price. Now let's try to understand the net domestic product. What is this net domestic product all about? The output of the country's economy. When I'm going to talk about the net output of the country's economy during an year is called as its NDP. Now this is very, very important. Why? Because during the year of a country's capital assets are subjected to wear and tear, which is quite but normal. We are not going to worry about it. Yes, it happens, and this is due to the outcome. Because we are involved in some sort of production, they are subjected to wear and tear. The usage value will come into picture. So how do we calculate? We deduct a percentage of investment from the GDP to arrive at NDP. In a very similar way, net domestic product is nothing but GDP at factor cost less depreciation. So let me just write it down for you. GDP at factor cost. Let me use the small symbol here. Factor cost is equal to, now this is NDP. I'm just going to try to put it here as NDP. NDP at factor cost is equal to GDP minus the depreciation factor. Now that is very, very important for us. Why? Because if you understand this formula here, NDP, the net domestic, we are arriving at the net value. How can you arrive at net? Subtract all the gross factors from that. So you are subtracting the depreciation from the gross domestic product at the factor cost. You will get your net domestic product. Followed by, this is the accumulation of all factors of income earned by the residents of a country and includes income earned from the country as well as from the abroad. So all the money that is accumulated by the citizens of the country, by the people of country, plus the income that is accrued from the abroad. So whatever income that comes from the abroad, that is from the outside, also will be a part of the net domestic product. Now, what is very important is that after subtracting all the factors, after deleting all the factors, whatever income gets accrued completely into us is what we are worried as the net domestic product. So that is why we say that this is a very, very important concept altogether. Followed by the NNP at market price less indirect tax at subsidies. Now, this is very, very important for all of us. Why? Because GDP, what is GDP? We know that it's a gross domestic product that we have been talking about, and this is calculated at the price. Now, NNP at market price less the indirect tax and surprise, that is what we are talking about, the net national product altogether. So, from GDP, we can even arrive at the NNP, that is a net national product. Now, we can also use GNP here and come at NNP also. So GNP is what? Gross national product. How will I arrive at NNP from there? You have to subtract the depreciation subsidies factors altogether, and then you will get at the NNP. So they define the GDP and GNP market prices at the market value produced by a country factor. So when I'm taking the NNP, I'm directly telling you market price less the indirect taxes and subsidies. So this is how you will be able to arrive at the NNP value. But then Dernberg was one of the greatest economists. He also tries to define GDP at market price as the output of the final goods and services produced in the domestic territory of the country. So now we have two factors. One side, the NNP is arrived straight at market price less the indirect taxes and add subsidies to it. Yes, you will be able to get it. But the other side, there is another definition which has been given by an economist who tries to talk about the GDP value, saying that the market value of the output, that is the final goods that are being produced within the domestic territory. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the information that has been shared through this session will be of a great help and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we will be learning more about the national income factors. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.